Study Session 2, Group Dynamics. Introduction. In this study session, we will discuss the concept of group dynamics. We will also explain how to measure group dynamics. Learning outcomes. When you have studied this session, you should be able to 1. Appraise group dynamics. 2. Measure group dynamics. Concept and nature of group dynamics. The term group dynamics refers to both the group process and the field. Fawcett, 1999. Lewin, 1951, first used the term to describe the powerful processes that take place in groups. Group dynamics refers to the scientific study of groups, or a general term for group processes. Fawcett, 1999. According to Cartwright and Zander, 1968, group dynamics is a field of inquiry dedicated to advancing knowledge about the nature of groups, the law of their development, and their interrelations with individuals, other groups, and the larger institutions. They also pointed out what group dynamics is not. For instance, it is not a therapeutic perspective, holding that psychological well-being can be ensured through participation in small groups guided by a skilled therapist. It is not also the communication of certain rules or guidelines that enable individuals to develop the skills needed for smooth and satisfying social interactions. Group dynamics does not refer to loose collection of maxims connecting how groups should be organized, emphasizing, for example, such niceties as equal participation by all group members, democratic leadership, and high level of member satisfaction. Rather, group dynamics is an attempt to subject many aspects of groups to scientific analysis through the construction of theories and vigorous testing of these theories through empirical research. Malcolm and Noll gave one description of group dynamics. According to them, group dynamics implies the complex forces that are acting upon every group throughout its existence, which causes it to behave the way it does, e.g., moving or changing. The dynamic aspect of the group is that it is always moving, doing something, changing, or becoming, interacting, and acting. The nature and direction of its movement is determined by forces being exerted on it from within and/or from outside. These forces and their resultant effect on the group constitutes its dynamics. Group dynamics is relevant to social work practice. Its relevance is much evident in all social work groups. It is relevant in the sense that its psychodynamic forces are operative in all groups: psychotherapy, therapeutic, mental health, educational group, and so on, at all times. The multiple interaction of the social forces which are generated within the group by the personalities of its members and the characteristics of group functions, together with forces from outside the group pertaining to the environment, constitute the group dynamics. Measurements in group dynamics. To understand groups, researchers need to find ways to assess group members, interpersonal actions, and psychological reactions. To this end, two measurement tools will be discussed in this study, namely, the observational and self-report measures, which give group dynamics a foothold in the scientific tradition. Observational techniques. Observational measures are measurement methods that involve watching and recording individual and group actions. It may be participant observation, overt or covert observation, or structured observation. Participant observation. This is a process in which the observer's presence in a social situation is maintained for the purpose of scientific investigation. The observer is in a face-to-face relationship with the observed, and by participating with them in their natural life setting, he gathers data. It involves watching and recording interpersonal behavior while taking part in the social process. Overt and covert observation. In overt observation, the researcher acts as an overt observer of the group. The group members know that the researcher is observing them and recording their behavior. Such openness means the researcher does not have to mislead the group in any way. However, revealing his purpose, he may indirectly influence the group behavior. Hence, there is tendency for individuals to act differently when they know they are being observed. Such a tendency is called Hawthorne effect, that is, a change in behavior that occurs when individuals know they are being studied by researchers. Covert observation is a measurement method that records group members' actions without the subject's knowledge or group knowledge. Some researchers prefer to use this method, but they may face ethical issues if their observations invade the privacy of the people they are watching. Structured observational measures. These are methods of measurement that involve classifying, coding subject actions under clearly defined categories. An example of such coding system is Ballet's Interaction Process Analysis, IPA. The IPA coding system can be used to classify group behavior into social, emotional, and task-oriented categories. Self-report measures. These are based on the idea that if you want to know how group members feel about something or why they performed a particular behavior, ask them to tell you. How you go about asking vary. You can administer carefully constructed personality tests, distribute attitude questionnaires, or conduct face-to-face interviews. These self-report measures are alike in that they involve asking a question and recording the answer. Self-report measures are assessment devices, such as questionnaires, tests, inventories, or interviews that ask respondents to describe their feelings, attitude, or beliefs, e.g., sociometry, sociogram, anxiety, and depression rating scales, etc. Research designs in group dynamics. Researchers use many techniques to check the adequacy of their suppositions about groups, but the three most common approaches are: 1. Case studies of single groups. 2. Experimental studies that manipulate aspects of the group's situations. And 3. Correlational analysis of the relationship between various aspects of the group. Case studies. One of the best ways to understand groups in general is to understand one group in particular. Case study is an in-depth examination of a single group. If the group has not yet disbanded, the researcher may decide to observe it as it carries out functions. Alternatively, investigators may cull facts about the group from interviews with members, descriptions of the group written by journalists or members' biographical writings. Researchers have done case studies of cults, government leaders at international summits, crisis intervention, teams in psychiatric hospitals, families coping with alcoholic members, and so on. Advantages and disadvantages. Case studies have both advantages and disadvantages. For instance, by focusing on a limited number of cases, researchers often provide richly detailed descriptions that make fascinating reading. Examination of public records pertaining to the group does not make the study to disrupt or alter naturally occurring group process. However, case studies yield only limited information about groups in general. Hence, the researcher should bear it in mind that the group studied may be so unique that it tells us little about other groups. Also, researchers rarely use objective measures of group process when conducting case studies. Hence, their interpretations can be influenced by their own assumptions and biases. Not only that, the materials used may be inaccurate or unavailable to the researcher. Experimental design. This is used for experimental studies. It is a research design in which the investigator manipulates at least one variable by randomly assigning participants to two or more different conditions while measuring at least one other variable. Two major variables are involved in this design, namely independent and dependent variable. Independent variables. These are aspects of the situation manipulated by the investigator in an experimental study. They are the causal variable in a cause-effect relationship, e.g., level of anxiety. Dependent variables. These are the responses of the subject measured by the researcher. They are the effect variables in a cause-effect relationship, e.g., academic performance. The key characteristics of an experiment are the manipulation of the independent variable, the systematic assessment of the dependent variables, and the control of other possible contaminating factors or variables. Advantages and disadvantages. Researchers who design their experiments carefully can make inferences about the causal relationships linking variables. If experiments are conducted properly, they can be used to detect causal relationships among variables. Experiments offer an excellent means of testing hypotheses about the causes of group behavior. However, experiments have their logical, methodological, and ethical problems. For example, the researchers cannot always control the situation sufficiently to manipulate the independent variable or keep other variables constant. Experiments often work in laboratories with ad hoc groups that are created just for the research, but these groups may differ in important ways from naturally occurring groups. Correlational designs. They are used for correlational studies. Correlational designs are not experimental techniques that use statistical procedures to examine the future of the relationship between variables of interest. Correlational studies take their names from the statistics correlation coefficient ranging from +1 to -1, with the distance from 0, the neutral point, indicating the strength of the relationship. Advantages and disadvantages. Researchers use correlational designs whenever they wish to know more about the relationship between variables. When coupled with accurate measurement techniques, correlational studies offer a means of clearly describing these relationships without disrupting or manipulating any aspect of the group. Correlational studies, however, yield only limited information about the causal relationship between variables because no variables are manipulated by the researcher. Study session summary. In this study session, we focused on the term group dynamics. We noted that it refers to both the group process and the field. The dynamic aspect of a group is that it is always moving, changing, or becoming, interacting, and acting. End of study session 2. Thank you for listening.